U.S. intelligence leaders have described the Chinese Communist Party as a major threat to national security. The director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, told lawmakers at a Senate hearing today that Chinese President Xi Jinping is consolidating power in his country and has surrounded himself with, quote, like-minded loyalists. Intelligence officials also said Beijing has continued to strengthen its relationship with Russia. Olivia Gazis and Rebecca Kaplan join us now. Olivia is a CBS News intelligence and national security reporter, and Rebecca is a Capitol Hill news producer, one of my colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us. To both of you, Olivia, I want to start with you. What else did U.S. intelligence leaders say today when it comes to competition with China?
Sure. Well, Nicole, you know this hearing tries to cover almost literally a world of national security threats in just over 2 hours. But really, the unsurprising and overarching thread that emerged today was this threat emanating from the Chinese government. You heard the director of national intelligence describe the threat from the CCP as the leading and most consequential threat that U.S. national security faces today, and describing how President Xi Jinping and the circle of loyalists now believe that China's path to becoming this preeminent power in East Asia and a major power on the world stage is going to come at the expense of U.S. power and influence. And she also explained how China has determined that it's not in its interest to complicate the relationship with the United States, to keep that on a relatively stable footing. But you saw in questioning by senators how that's really going to be a complicated thing to do because, for example, in this discussion, an ample discussion of TikTok, the FBI director, Chris Wray, pointed out how the Chinese government could pretty easily control the data and the devices of millions of Americans, could potentially unfurl a narrative designed to divide the American public, and that detecting that on our part would really be difficult.
And Rebecca, we know that China also came up in today's hearing on the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. What did some of the witnesses say with respect to a potential lab leak, which, of course, is something that we've heard quite a bit about recently in the news?
It is, Nicole, and all three of the witnesses that Republicans brought to today's hearing said that they did believe that this virus originated from a lab in China, and that, they said, is still not definitive, an open question, but that is what they believe, and they think it's an important question to get to the bottom to. And we know that's been a top priority of Republicans as they've taken the majority. That's why they formed their own subcommittee to investigate the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. Those experts included former CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield, who actually said that he believed he was sidelined in the administration, in the Trump administration, for saying that he believed the virus came from a lab and not from natural origins. That's the animal Wuhan market theory. And he believes his views were pushed aside. This has been a big point of contention between Republicans and Democrats, between even members of the scientific community. And Republicans have actually felt vindicated recently as we've heard more about the potential origins of the virus. The Energy Department saying a few days ago that they believed the virus did come from a lab, although they only had low confidence about that. And FBI Director Chris Wray also saying he believes the most likely origin of the virus was indeed from a Chinese lab.
And getting back to this global threats hearing, Olivia, officials also spoke about strengthening the relationship between Beijing and Moscow. Let's take a listen.
The next few years are critical as strategic competition with China and Russia intensifies, in particular over how the world will evolve and whether the rise of authoritarianism can be checked and reversed.
So what did the director of national intelligence have to say about this and the state of the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, Nicole, I think this was one of the most comprehensive updates that we've gotten from the intelligence community on the war in Ukraine. And the DNI raised a few points with regard to how that's going. First, she said that Putin seems to now have a better understanding of the limitations of his own military, which, given the loss of life and armor that we saw in the early stages, just wasn't clear. So he seems to have better information about that now, and he seems to have revised down his objectives to be somewhat more modest, such that he's maintaining his grip on the territories he's already conquered, rather than trying to acquire more. Second, she said that it's unlikely that Russia is going to make more territorial gains this year, but that doesn't seem to be bothering President Putin, that he believes that time is on his side. He believes that he can start and stop fighting and sort of wait out this Western-backed resistance that the Ukrainians have put up, and that even if he pauses and restarts the fighting, that he can really maintain those strategic interests in Ukraine over time. Third, as military options become less attractive to Putin, he may reach for some more asymmetric options. He may do more nuclear cyber rattling. He may reach for cyber tools. He may reach for space capabilities. He may lean on the friends that he still thinks he has left in this world, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and to an extent the Chinese, which the Director of National Intelligence said today had deepened this relationship with Moscow, but was nonetheless still uncomfortable about sending that lethal aid that we've been hearing about in recent weeks.
And Rebecca, I want to turn to some other news that we know has generated a lot of response on Capitol Hill, and of course that being the release of these January 6 tapes, thousands of hours of footage that were provided to Tucker Carlson. I spoke recently with Congressman Benny Thompson, who served as the chairman of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6 attack. I want to play a little bit of that.
Does this undermine your work?
Well, it doesn't undermine our work. It stands for itself, obviously, based on the responses that we've gotten from the beginning to the completion of our work. The public understands, based on the order that we were given, to look at the facts and circumstances that brought January 6 about and make recommendations, and that's what we did.
But Mr. Carlson also called your work a lie.
You know, I look at the Dominion voting lawsuit that precipitated a lot of what occurred on January 6th, and Mr. Carlson was giving a narrative that he knew was untrue.
So obviously we heard from Congressman Thompson there, but what are Republican lawmakers saying about a potential investigation now into the Select Committee's work?
Well, last Congress, we had the committee investigating the January 6th attack. This Congress, controlled by Republicans in the House, we have the committee to investigate the committee investigating the January 6th attacks. So the House Administration Committee has Barry Loudermilk. He runs a subcommittee on oversight conducting an investigation into the January 6th committee. Here's what he had to tell reporters today on Capitol Hill about what they're looking at.
We are. I mean, we have the documents. Part of it is why did they not address this? What other areas did they not address? And so we have to really pick up where they left off. And so we have the documents, we have videos, we have a lot of information. We're going through that right now.
Congressman Loudermilk says that he is going to be looking at how people got into the Capitol in the first place. And one other thing he's interested in is whether these were people looking to overturn the government or a protest that got out of hand. And this has actually been a Republican response in part to these tapes that Tucker Carlson has been airing, saying this was just a protest that got out of hand. Democrats, of course, take a very different view. The committee has also set up a portal on their website for people to submit information. So we're going to see how this continues to play out over the next several months as January 6th remains a very contentious issue up here in the Capitol.
It certainly does. And very quickly before we let you go, Rebecca, another very contentious issue is this issue of the debt limit. And we know this afternoon that House lawmakers are being briefed by the CBO director before President Biden releases his budget tomorrow. Where do things stand with debt limit negotiations?
So far, things are at a standstill, Nicole, and I think that's partially because everyone is waiting to see not only what President Biden puts forward in his budget coming out this week, but also what the Republican response is, because we've heard a lot of Republican calls for cutting spending and putting the U.S. on a responsible fiscal path, but we haven't actually seen a proposal for what those cuts would look like. Our understanding is they are waiting for the White House to go first. Now, Speaker McCarthy told reporters this afternoon he has not yet had any further outreach from the White House about an additional meeting on the debt limit, so I think we'll see this issue pick up again in the next couple weeks ahead of a deadline a few months from now where they really need to raise that borrowing limit for the U.S.
All right. Things always come down to the 11th hour, as we both know. Rebecca Kaplan, Olivia Gazis, thank you so much for joining us.